Hello, everyone. I hope you're keeping well. Those in Nairobi, I hope you're keeping warm this cold evening. Welcome to today's session where we are addressing the monster or friend called debt. We really appreciate you making the time to be with us, and we hope that you continue to learn. My name is Grace Nzula. I am a trainer and HR consultant with the Tara Solutions, a HR and training firm, and a manager at Panesa's Training Institute, a carpentry school. Just for your information, we have a September intake in our carpentry school this Saturday. So if you have any interest, you can always reach out to me. So Get It Right with the Tara Solutions is a platform where we demystify issues to do with entrepreneurship and employment. We do this in partnership with Zalego Academy, a software development and capacity building academy, and NG Support Services, a brand management and communications company. This is our 12th webinar. We started with how to register your business legally, and last week we hosted the one and only Kalecha Mumo, who took us through growing your personal brand. If you missed any of our webinars, please visit Atara Solutions YouTube channel to catch up, and while at it, kindly subscribe and click the notification button. Next week, we shall be discussing personal branding for success. We have a very, very interesting and knowledgeable speaker, and we are so excited and looking forward. Kindly note, allow me to share with you some facts about business, because like I said, at Get It Right with the Tara Solutions, try to demystify issues around entrepreneurship. So for all the businesses that started in 2020, say for example, January, 22% will fail by December this year. Of the ones that remain, 30% will fail in the second year, which is now 2021. And of those, 50% will have failed by the fifth year. Now, unfortunately, most of them close shop by the 10th, about 70% will close shop by the 10th year. And this is the narrative that Get It Right with the Tara Solutions is trying to change. I am pleased to introduce today our speaker this evening, Mr. Roy Okonji, who is a debt and money management coach, a life coach, a motivational speaker, and an author. Hey, coach, so you have many accolades. He is the founder and director of Focus Universal, a debt management and life skills training and consulting firm. He's a published author of 5 titles, and among them is Debt is Good Only If You Master It and Breaking Free from the Trap of Debt, among others. He will let us know where we can find these books before the end of the session this evening. We invite you, our audience, to ask questions, and we will answer as many as possible. So, Coach Roy, debt management. And allow me to use a lot of people think that it is a monster. What do you think?
Right. It depends with where you're standing.
Uh-huh.
There is a ground that if you stood on it, then it will be a monster. But there's another ground. If you stood on it, then you begin to see it as a very simple thing.
Excellent. Help us know the difference.
Wow. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Tara Solutions, for inviting me to be with us tonight. I feel so honored to be here, and I feel so happy because of all things in life, today we have chance to reflect briefly on the subject of money, because the subject of money is one of those subjects that human beings do not like talking about, at least to the extent that is good enough to help us begin to make changes that are positive. Those who try to talk about money, you find them being comfortable narrating the inadequacy of money. Hakuna pesa. But we rarely create time to reflect about money. But beyond money, I'm happy that we are talking about this thing that many want to describe as a monster, and that is debt. And I need to start by saying that there is nothing absolutely wrong with debt. Debt is neither good nor bad absolutely. Everyone has chance to define their debt the way they want. Two people will walk into a lender's office, they will borrow the same amount of money, purporting to do the same thing. But 2 years down the line, one of them is crying when debt is mentioned, while the other is smiling when debt is mentioned, courtesy of where the debts they took have left them. And a lot of times it is the choices that we make around the debt that we get ourselves into that makes the difference. Sometimes we want to blame the lenders, we want to blame debt, we want to blame a lot of things, but ourselves. But when you check clearly, you begin to see that we had issues at some point, either in the course of our borrowing or after we borrowed, or perhaps we even borrowed when we ought not to have borrowed. Saying that the conversation of debt management is one that is so close to my heart because it is a subject that I have struggled with personally. Those who know a bit of my story will tell you that it is a journey that I have really traveled, and it's a long and tedious one. And therefore, I found the burden to want to also just try to enlighten others on the truths of this subject, so that then even as they travel their own journey, then it becomes a lighter journey. Or even as they engage in debt, then they can be able to take debt for reasons that would leave them at a better place. And so that is what we will be reflecting on tonight. I also run what I call the debt clinic, and this is simply a platform for one-on-one coaching where I sit down with people who are either struggling with debt or just want to know whether there is a better way of managing their money or managing their debt situation. I'm trying to tell guys, look, you don't have to think suicide. You don't have to give up on life just because you have reached a dead end with your debts. Something can be done about it. If you could be thinking that where you are is the worst position, but wait until you hear somebody else's story, then you begin to realize that you still have a lot of space for you to come back to normalcy again.
Yes.
So I must begin by mentioning that the subject of debt management is a huge one. It's a conversation we cannot be able to exhaust in one sitting, and simply because, number one, all of us have interacted with debt before, one way or the other, and therefore our expectations are many and varied. And my prayer tonight is that in the course of the next sentences that I will make, someone will grab a sentence that will help push them to the next level, even as they handle money and even as they interact with debt, or even as they attempt to regain sanity in what seems to be a tainted financial script in their lives. So we go straight into asking ourselves, what exactly is debt management?
Yes.
Because we have agreed that debt is here to stay. We cannot meet in this sitting and declare debt null and void or non-existent. Debt is here to stay. We found it and we will leave it. But therefore, we have to ask ourselves, how do we conduct ourselves around it so that it does not swallow us, it does not become a monster, it becomes a partner of progress.
Yes.
So conventionally, the world defines debt management as the process through which debtors seek to regain control of their debt situation. That is conventionally, in a few words, what the world looks at debt management as. But I have a little problem with that particular view because it presumes that debt management only begins at the point where someone is already in debt and they have lost control. That means they're already struggling for them to begin to institute debt management. So I disagreed at some point with that definition, and I made a slight alteration of that definition, and I came up with the definition that I want to share with us, simply because I believe that debt management begins way before we even get to receive the money we are borrowing, way before we start struggling. Debt management begins at the point of inception of the idea that we want to borrow. If you get it wrong from the beginning, then you have made your journey more difficult in future. You've already set yourself for trouble. So that means then if you get it right, then you already are managing the situation beforehand. So this is how I want us to define debt management. It is the process through which debtors seek to gain or regain control of their debt situation. So I introduced the gain bit in that definition. And the keywords there are gain or regain. So gain and regain. So gain paints the picture of you getting control from the onset.
Yeah.
That means as you make sober borrowing decisions, then you begin to lessen the chance of you struggling in the repayment of that debt in the days to come. Then regain comes to speak to those who may already have lost control of their debt situation. And that is how I came up with two kinds of debt management. There is what I call debt management before you get trapped and debt management after you get trapped, right? So, but before we get into these two, the big question is, why is debt management necessary? Why is it important that we have to learn how to manage our debt? And the reason is simple. It is because of a monster that is called the trap of debt. Debt itself is not a monster, but the trap of debt is a monster by all definitions. Now, here is the difference. You know, debt is simply a borrowing. But the trap of debt is a situation where repayment of debt becomes difficult or impossible. That means you've borrowed, perhaps you've been repaying well. Then a day comes where the lender is expecting you to pay money, but maybe you don't have the full amount. That means repayment has started becoming difficult. A day will surely come if you do nothing about it when the lender is expecting money and you totally have nothing to repay the debt with. So it has started becoming impossible to repay the debt. So it's as simple as that. So that is the trap of debt. So when you find yourself in that space where you begin to struggle in repayment, if you do nothing about it, it begins to degenerate into a cycle where you find yourself borrowing to pay existing debt in order to borrow again, maybe to survive, or earning money to pay existing debt so that you can borrow again to survive and expect to earn so that you can pay what you borrowed. Now that cycle is so difficult to break, and that is why I now give you permission to call the trap of debt the monster and not debt itself. So it is because of this monster that it becomes important that we begin to master how to manage debt. And so the trap of debt, the reason as to why I call it a monster is because it has a way of eating into every aspect of one's life for both individuals and businesses. The trap of debt, when I'm talking about work-life choices, what you people call work-life balance, I like dividing life into four parts: your health, your relationships, your career, and your financial life. The trap of debt has a way of neutralizing each of these four areas of your life and reducing you into a shell of a human being if you do nothing about it. And that is why it has the certificate to be called a monster. Look at health, for example. Health can be divided into very many parts: physical health, mental, emotional, spiritual, and what have you. The trap of debt can eat into all this. You see, physical health, for instance, is just about diet and fitness. And diet, we're talking about what you eat, how you eat, when you eat, why you eat, but most importantly, if you eat. When you are trapped in debt, we do not take it for granted when you are able to put food on the table. I do not need to overemphasize that a trapped person is worse than a broke person.
Yes.
Brokenness brings you to the surface, to zero. But the trap of debt takes you to negative. You are broke, but people are still pushing you for their money. When these two people meet, The trapped person looks at the broke person and says, I wish I was just broke with no one chasing me. So the trapped guy admires the broke guy.
Mm-hmm.
So you will attend nutrition seminars on how you need to eat right, the kind of foods that you need to eat. Then you go to the supermarket and check on the shelves the foods they have prescribed for you. You look at the price and you look at your pocket, you look at the price again, and you realize it is not the good notes that you wrote in the seminar. It is what your pocket can afford. And that's how your physical health begins to get affected. Of course, your gym subscription cannot be renewed if you are worse than a broke person. And so you get affected physically, mentally, because of the pressure from lenders. You are absent-minded. You cannot afford to concentrate. It even gets to eat into your career, to affect your job, your performance in every other area of life. And emotionally, people who are trapped in debt are always irate, easily irate. They get angered so fast because they feel the world has wronged them. And that pressure from lenders a lot of times makes them to lose their cool. It is easy for them to pick fights for things that ordinarily they would laugh off. That's how it gets to eat into their health. Relationships have been affected. I know so many friends who used to be so close. These days they don't see eye to eye because one gave the other money and the other was not able to repay. And we have all seen these things. And uh, it has affected even the marriage institution because when one of the partners is trapped in debt, money that ought to have been used for useful things in the family will be diverted into paying debt and a lot of those things. Careers have not been spared. People have lost concentration at the workplace. People have been tempted to steal at the workplace because of that particular pressure. Because people are worse than broke, they cannot go back to school to better their skills so that they increase their chances for career development. Some people lose their self-esteem, so they cannot even effectively network. So where we are talking about networking for career development, they can't fit there. They want to hide in their houses because they feel the world knows that they are broke. Those that are in a business career, when your business is trapped in debt, it gets dangerous because you cannot meet the demands of your customers. You've lost trust with your suppliers, and therefore your business gets affected in a big way. And then financially, when you're trapped in debt, everything financial loses meaning. You will attend meetings, people are trained about the importance of savings and investments, but you're seated and wondering, do people still save in this day and age? Yani, you mean there is someone in this country who can afford to invest with this salary that looks so little? Everything financial loses meaning. Your income account becomes what I call a transit account, where money comes in to just report that I also passed through here on its way to the hands that are waiting for it. And that becomes a dangerous thing because then you reduce yourself to someone who goes to the office just to work because you have debt, but you stop getting any fulfillment from the work you're doing because the pressure is the one that is pushing you into going to the office. Given chance, you just quit and just surrender to fate because life has gotten you to a corner that is very uncomfortable. So basically, that's how the trap of debt can reduce you into a shell of a human being. We just see you walking. You simply walking because you woke up and found yourself still breathing, but life lost you, or you lost life long time ago. That is why it's a monster, and that's why it's important for us to master how to be able to manage it. Now, that said, let me quickly then swing into the first category, what I called debt management before you get trapped. This is what you would want to call preventive debt management. At this stage, you are trying to be careful so that as you get yourself into borrowing, you are only making borrowings that are necessary, and you are also using the right process to do the borrowing. There's something else I teach that I call purpose-driven borrowing. where I detail the ideal process of going through a borrowing process. But basically what we are doing in this first kind of debt management is that we are trying to minimize what I call borrowing blunders. Because if you make these blunders, you are beginning to set yourself for trouble in future. So what are these blunders that you need to start avoiding? And I have three sets of blunders. I have what I call blunders before borrowing, blunders during borrowing, and blunders after borrowing. So before borrowing, this is the initial stage, the inception of the idea of borrowing. You've just decided that I need to acquire money. There are some blunders you can make at that decisioning stage. At that stage, you're still having a conversation within yourself. You have just woken up and called yourself to a meeting and started convincing yourself that you need to acquire some debt. I need to clarify here that a lot of borrowers are what I call ability-driven borrowers. They borrow simply because they qualify, not because they needed to borrow, just that they qualify. They walk into a lender's office, they flash out their payslip, and the first question they ask the lender is, check for me how much I can qualify. So anytime you find someone asking a lender to check for them how much they can qualify, it tells you that they did not know what they wanted. They have no clue the amount they are looking for. And the lender tells them, you qualify for 200,000, nipatie form. You qualify for 1 million, nipatie form. What took you to the lender is the big question. So then we have to start moving from ability-driven borrowing and begin getting to the direction of purpose-driven borrowing. So there are mistakes we can make at the point of deciding to borrow. And some of the mistakes is when you fail to qualify your purpose for borrowing. You need to ask yourself, must I borrow? Now, this thing that I want to borrow for, is it something that is going to add value to me? Is it something that will leave me better off than it found me? This particular debt that I want to get myself into, is it a debt that later on I look back and smile, or it's a debt that later on I look back and feel bad that I got myself into it? So you have to qualify the purpose of your borrowing. Now, as you seek to qualify the purpose of your borrowing, it's also important to ask yourself, who am I borrowing for? Now, when I say who you are borrowing for, I do not mean after you get the borrowed funds, who will you give the money? It goes beyond that. And I'm beginning to ask yourself, who has influenced you into borrowing? For example, there is someone who will see a colleague with a beautiful phone, and they also want to buy a similar phone or a better one to compare with the colleague or to outshine the colleague. So you go, because you don't have the money, you borrow to buy that phone. In my language, you have borrowed for your colleague and not for yourself. And this is how you get to know that you borrowed for your colleague. Tomorrow, as you appear in the office to flash out your phone, if you find your colleague with a new phone better than the one you are trying to compete with, you feel frustrated. That means the phone you bought was not yours. You simply bought for your friend. And the debt you took was not your debt. You were borrowing for your friend. Now, good debts are the debts that we take courtesy of original inspiration. We take them for ourselves. I'm not trying to say that you stop getting inspired by other people. It is good to be inspired by others. It is good to visit a friend and find them in their own house and feel the need to work hard for you to achieve your own house. But it is dangerous for you to visit a friend and see them in their own house, and tomorrow you are in the bank to take up a mortgage to also compete or compare with them. So as you get inspired by others, be sure to customize the inspiration to fit into your financial realities. Your realities could dictate that you wait longer. Your realities could dictate that you make some more money for you to be able to achieve that particular thing that you've been inspired to achieve. So that is how you qualify the purpose for your borrowing. Then another blunder you can make at that particular stage is failure to consider the impact of the proposed borrowing on your budget. Now, this very few people do. Very many people, they only look at their qualifiability for debt. Now, when I say you fail to consider the impact of the proposed borrowing, I mean, before you take up any debt, ask yourself, the proposed repayment amount, what was it doing in my budget? You have been told, or rather you want to take up a loan that is repaid at 10,000 per month. Yet you've been using your income coin to coin without even being able to save. Ask yourself, once this 10K is gone to repay the debt, what will I use to do what the 10K used to do before the borrowing? So that is a very serious consideration that very few people very few people consider. And it burns very many fingers, because once repayments are loaded, when the lender begins to collect their money, that is the time many people realize, kumbe, what they got themselves into was debt. At the time of borrowing, we are emotionally high. We are looking at the money that we are about to get, and we forget every other consideration. But the day of recovery, when the lender wants to have their money back, that's the time many people realize it was actually debt they got themselves into. So once the 10K has been deducted, that's the day you discover, higher, kumbe, this 10K was part of the landlord's money. So what are you going to do when the landlord is knocking? You find yourself going to borrow to pay the landlord. But because you've exhausted your borrowing from the formal space, you find yourself going to borrow from dangerous sources, maybe from Shylocks. And that is how you begin to set yourself for a lot of drama in the days to come. So that is part of the blunders before borrowing. So let's say you have qualified your purpose for borrowing and everything is check, and you want to move ahead and do the borrowing. There are also blunders you can make in the process of borrowing that will also leave you in a very difficult position. For instance, there are people who fail to consider the cost of borrowing. You see, you have decided to borrow and you've approached a lender. For many people at that stage, the only thing that is appealing to them is the money they are looking for. It doesn't matter at what cost it will come, they simply want the amount. So if you have a problem worth 100,000, your eyes are fixed on 100,000, and you want to stop at nothing to acquire the 100,000. And that is why in this city, we have Shylocks who are giving out money at 100% per week. And the place is full time. These are people who are not stopping to think about the repercussions of what they're getting themselves into. So if it's Monday and you borrow 20,000 from them, you are simply seeing 20,000 today, but next Monday, you will be forced to look at 40,000 because you failed to consider the cost of what you are getting yourself into. So as much as it is possible, compare cost. Check around and see what the lenders are offering. Those who are borrowing from banks, it was made mandatory by CBK that banks will share with you the total cost of credit. But look at what we do these days. The banks will give us that sheet of paper that is called the total cost of credit for us to sign. But many of us, because we are rushing to get the money, we fail to even go through the TCC form, the total cost of credit form, before we sign. So we rush into signing. In fact, the lenders have known our weakness. They give us the forms with the excess where we need to sign. And so we get the forms and rush into signing where we need to sign. Then later on, we start crying. We say we were never told, but we signed. And there was a good breakdown that you're borrowing amount X, the interest portion of this is this, these are the other costs that will come, and things like those. So we have to consider. When you fail to consider, you're making a blunder during borrowing, and it will cost you in the days to come. Another blunder during borrowing is failure to consider the repayment terms. Someone is giving you money and they're telling you, my money must be repaid in 2 weeks' time. You and I know that you are a salaried person. You will only get your money after 30 days from the day of borrowing. But you are sent to it and say it is okay. You will get your money in 2 weeks' time. You are failing to consider repayment terms. After 2 weeks, the lender is putting pressure on you because you assented to it and agreed that you will pay after 2 weeks, but you don't have money. You are not realistic. You are not practical. And that begins to put pressure on you. And when you are under pressure, you begin to make other decisions that are not good for you. You could also fail to consider the turnaround time. You're still making a blunder during borrowing. Turnaround time is simply the time between when you make an application for debt and when the money will be ready for your usage. So you have to match the kind of credit that you are going for with the nature of your need. If you're in an emergency situation, someone is in the hospital, they've told you to put a deposit for the doctors to start attending to them. And then you go to a bank and start processing a loan that is secured by a title deed. You're joking, right? Now, the money will surely come, but it will come when it's overtaken by events. So you will have idle money, money that you didn't have a plan for. There is nothing under the sun that is as dangerous as money in the hands that did not have a plan for it. Simply because the average human mind can manufacture usage for money in 10 minutes. Today, if I ask you what you will do with 100,000, I just need to take a stroll, whistle, and come back after 10 minutes, you will tell me. If I blow it to 1,000,000, I still simply need to give you 10 minutes, and you will tell me how you will use your 1,000,000. So when you find yourself with money that you do not have use for, then it becomes dangerous because you will use the money. Needs will emerge in 10 minutes, and you will use the money in ways that may not be useful. And when repayment time comes, you begin to struggle. And that's how you begin to find yourself trapped in debt. You have to match your TAT with the need that you have. Now, so I'm just mentioning a few of the blunders during borrowing. Then there are blunders that I call blunders after borrowing. You've successfully gone through the process of borrowing. Money has been disbursed into your account. You could also blunder at that point and burn your fingers in a big way. The first blunder in this category is when you choose to divert borrowed funds. You borrowed for use A, but when the money comes, the money begins to burn you. You begin to see so many other needs. And I've never understood why those needs usually know when the money has landed. That is the time you receive phone calls from all quarters, people giving you stories and needs that begin to compete with the reason why you borrowed. Now, if you bend to fulfill the emerging needs, you are creating a future emergency. If you are borrowing for school fees and you got the money before schools open, and that's the time you remember that you had not completed paying your bride price. That's the time you remember your car needs to be fixed. That's the time you remember that you didn't have food in the house. And you use that money to buy these things. And some voice behind our mind usually tells us that by the time schools are opening, you will have miraculously found the money. Shock on you. Schools will open, you don't have the money, and the money is needed. Let me give us a very practical story. I love teaching with stories a lot, and this is a true story. I am a retired banker, and most of my lives in the bank, I was in the credit function, and this is how I got to start interacting with the realities of the trap of debt, even before it got to mess me up. I remember someone that we loaned 450,000. And he was going to pay school fees for his 4 children who are in institutions of higher learning. Then on the day of disbursement, the guy withdrew the first 100,000 shillings. And I remember as he was walking out of the bank, I called him to my desk. I don't know what was bothering me, but I think I was just living in my natural element. And I asked him, who are you going to pay for first? And the old man looked at me and told me, young man, this is my money. Mind your own business. You know, I didn't even know why I was bothering finding out how you're going to spend the money. Because, well, naturally, from a banker's perspective, once you have qualified and have given you the money, it's up to you. But, well, the voice that was naturally installed in me got me calling him just to find out. And that's what he told me. What he did is that he crossed the street after the bank and lodged in the hotel overlooking the bank. He made phone calls to all his friends to come and witness how powerful he had suddenly become. Na akachafua meza in that town, and his friends were entertained. The following morning, he walked back to the bank. This time round, he was wearing those lodging slippers, the blue one and the red one that have been notched. I think we are serious thieves, that those guys will give us blue and red and still think we will steal. They have to cut them so that we don't steal. So he walked back to the bank with those notched slippers, and he came to my desk, and I asked him, I hope you paid. And the guy gives me a story, and he tells me he called his friends, he entertained them. When he got drunk, they pickpocketed the balance. So 100,000 gone, day one. After giving me the story and he was smelling of heavy alcohol, he walks back to the counter and takes another 100,000. As he goes out, I call him again. I tell him, I hope you're going to do the right thing. And the guy tells me that this is still my money, so you need to be cautious and you need to avoid poking your nose into my business. So I leave him, he goes. The long and short of it is that on the third day, the wife has not seen him at home. So she's concerned. She knew money for school fees was going to come. So she asks around and she's told the guy is lodging in a hotel somewhere in town. So she goes to the area chief and the chief sanctions a few askaris and writes a letter and they raid the hotel. On the fourth day, the guys brought to the bank. They were only able to salvage 75,000 bob. Your guess is as good as mine as to whether they were able to pay school fees or not. Now, diversion of borrowed funds is even dangerous for business people. It is a big problem for business people. Now, when you borrow to grow your business, you borrow working capital. The lender comes to examine your business and looks at the proposed usage. And the lender knows that if we give you this amount and you use it the way you have proposed, then your revenue will grow in such a way that it will be able to pay us and allow your business to retain something. Now, when people get money they have borrowed, those voices begin to come. So money that you borrowed for business development, you begin to use that money for doing other things. Then repayment day comes. Because you didn't put the money in the business the way you had thought, you find yourself beginning to struggle. You start eating cash flow to firefight because the lender expects the money. So you start using business operating money to start cooling the fire from the lender. And this is how it becomes a dangerous thing for business people. I have done recently a video on my YouTube, and guys can check it out. Just look for Roy Okonji. There is a series I'm doing that I call the By the Way series. And these are just short videos to give you that by the way moment. Have you ever read something or heard something and then you're like, by the way, I never thought about it that way. So recently I did one for diversion of borrowed funds. And I was just painting a picture of how dangerous that can be. And I've shared practical stories of a business that I was managing that collapsed. A huge business. It was a wholesale business that I was working with, and the client, after borrowing, decided to divert and buy a car. Some interesting thoughts usually crop up when we have borrowed, and that is dangerous. That's a big blunder. The last blunder under this category of blunders after borrowing is when you choose not to pay the money that you have borrowed. It is different when the situation is thick and maybe you do not have money. Maybe you lost your job, maybe business has collapsed, and you don't have money to continue paying. But there are people who have the ability, but they sit and choose not to pay. You've heard the Swahili say, kukopa ni harusi, kulipa ni matanga. This is reality. There are people who choose not to pay. So this is how it gets to affect you. These days with the CRB listing, you get to begin to set yourself for denial of credit in future because you refuse to pay some debt back. There could be a day in future when you truly need credit, but because you sabotaged your way to credit, then you find yourself in trouble. So we have to be cautious. As long as we are able to pay, we have to pay. The process of borrowing does not stop when you receive money. It stops when you pay the last coin of that particular money. So let me stop there for part A and briefly say something about part B, which is debt management after you get trapped. Now, this second part is what many people usually yearn to hear. This is in many meetings where I've been. As I finish speaking, many people will be asking, so how do I manage my situation? I am in this danger zone. This is what conventionally has been looked as debt management. After you have already borrowed and you have burned your fingers and you have lost control of the situation, how do you begin to regain control of the situation? I want to quickly mention the formula that I use to guide the people I work with on my one-on-one coaching, what I call the ADSA four-stage approach. It's a formula that I developed to principally guide the process of managing debt. ADSA four-stage approach. Now, the first A is acceptance. You must accept that you're in trouble. Acceptance is the beginning of every healing. You can never solve a problem whose existence you still deny. As long as you are still firefighting, as long as you still want the world to think that you are doing well, the truth is that you're still in denial. You cannot start the healing process. So the starting point is acceptance. You must accept that you've made mistakes in the past. You must accept that you are responsible for where you are today. You must accept that there is no one else to blame, that you have a role to play in where you are today. You must accept that you have the responsibility to turn the table around. You must accept that it is doable. You must accept that the best time to start the journey of change is now. Acceptance is a mental stage. It's a stage where we are convincing our mind that where we are is not cast in stone. We can turn things around. We can begin our journey of healing. We can begin to come up again. So it's a very crucial stage. Until you accept, we cannot move. There are people sometimes who are forced to come for a one-on-one session, and I can tell these ones have been forced, maybe by their spouse or their parents or whoever it is in their lives. Because when we sit down, you can clearly see that this one has not accepted. As long as you still say, were it not for so and so, I wouldn't be in debt today, you have not accepted that you had a role to play in where you are today. So that is where we begin. You have to accept. That's a mental stage to set your mind ready for the journey. And I must mention here as a point of inspiration that it does not matter how deep it is. The truth is, with the right focus, anyone can turn around their situation. You only need to get to that turning point where you decide that enough is enough. For me, my turning point happened the day I received an award, the day I got a trophy from one of my Shylocks, thanking me for continued business, thanking me for being the most trustworthy borrower. And I love that trophy so much. I walk with it everywhere I go, excuse me, to speak about this monster. It is because it opened my eyes. I had messed myself. I have mentioned in the media enough times that I'm still looking for my match in terms of financial recklessness. But the day I got that trophy, I started asking myself questions. Did I really have to get a trophy for borrowing, not even from the mainstream lenders, but from the other market?
Roy, we have about 2
Right? So
minutes to
acceptance
finish
is the
that.
first step.
Yes.
It's okay. Let me just rush through. Then the second stage is disclosure. That is the D, disclosure. Disclosure is where you come to terms with your reality, the numbers that affect you. And in disclosure, I'm simply saying that you cannot effectively walk out of a hole if you cannot appreciate the depth of the hole. So this is the homework that I'm giving everyone at disclosure. At disclosure, you sit down and do a list. Do a list of everyone that you owe, including airtime advance. That list begins to speak to you. That list begins to communicate to you. You begin to make oaths within yourself. You begin to swear that I must come out of this thing. And so that's what happens at disclosure. And tonight, I want everyone, after this or at your ample time, sit down and do a list of everyone you owe. Let us stop there after, because it begins to speak to you. Then the S is the strategic stage. After you've seen your numbers, what next? How do you move from where you are? Now, this is where we begin to have diverging approaches, because there is no one size fit all kind of approach. Different people are on different planes financially. Different people are surrounded by different circumstances. So every journey now becomes personal. I wish we had time. I would have mentioned just a few of strategies, but I know we are running out of time. But I've detailed enough of them in my book, my latest book, Breaking Free from the Trap of Debt. Enough strategies that you read through them and maybe one or two of them could appeal to you, and you begin to do therapy at home. I've also detailed in that book what I call signs of a trapped person. There are people who don't believe that they are trapped. I've given, I think, 18 of them so that you look at them and you can see yourself clearly. I like saying you position yourself on the map of debt. After the strategic stage, you figured out what could work for you. Sometimes it's trial and error. You try this and you realize it's not working for me. You try a different one. But as long as you have the focus and you're looking forward to crossing the bridge to the next side of the bridge, then you will not stop simply because one strategy has refused to work. Then the A is the action stage. All these other stages, you simply deciding. Then you must confirm your decision by action. If you decide to reach out to your lenders, we must then see you picking a phone, calling your lender, and booking an appointment with them. So action is the last stage. I can only tell that you have good intentions towards me if I see you having good actions towards me. If your mouth is saying you have good intentions, but your actions are speaking otherwise, then you are not meaning what you're saying. So action is the last stage in that journey. Good people, this subject is huge. We can talk about it. By God's grace, I have developed original content that we can talk about the whole year without repeating ourselves, but we do not have that time today. So I just wanted to share those tips, and I want to pray and believe that someone has picked something that will speak into them. Grace mentioned that before I sign out, I will mention how you can get my books. I've written 5 of them. The first book is called Relate Well, Live Well. The importance of relating well with people wherever you are and how it affects your success in different areas of life. The second book is called Confronting Fear. That thing that holds you back. Every time you want to move forward, it calls you back and reminds you that you are not well equipped. If you try, you will fail. They will laugh at you, and you obey, only to see your neighbors thriving in the ideas you have always harbored. The third book is called You Can Do Better. That is the only promise I have, that you can do better. No one of us was created to stagnate in life. Our tomorrow needs to look better than our yesterday and today combined. The fourth book is called Debt is Good, only if you master it. Many people read the first part, debt is good, and they run into borrowing and they say, Troy said debt is good. The second part is very important, only if you master it. Actually, that is the title of the book. That book talks to borrowers and just shares ideas on how to make sober borrowing decisions. You must master debt in two ways. Number one is that you understand how debt works before you sink yourself into it. And number two, you turn debt into your servant, not the other way around. And lastly, the fifth book is called Breaking Free from the Trap of Debt. And in that book, I have just shared the journey systematically of coming out of the trap of debt. But first of all, I've painted a picture of the prison of debt, how it looks in detail, how it eats into your health, your finances, your relationship. And I've also described something, the new thing in town, addiction to borrowing, and how you can begin to manage it. Then I've now detailed the journey, the ADS process from from acceptance to action in a way that is simple and that can help you. This is how to get the book. Simply reach out on this number 0713
We will share your contact.
49717. You will share. Fantastic. Yes. So thank you so much. Let's see if we have any question that we can respond in the remaining minutes. Wow.
We have many questions. I think what we are going to do, because it's already 8:55, we can take about 2 questions. Yes. And then what we'll do is share with you the questions that we have received, answer them on paper, and then as we share your presentation, we share the questions answered, and then your contact and everything else. Obviously, we look forward to having you again. But on that note, we can take one question. Being able to meet my wants, needs, and at the same time save for an emergency. Okay, how would one be able to meet their wants, needs, and at the same time save to avoid getting into debt? Yeah.
Wow, good question. First of all, we must learn the art of planning and having control of what we want our money to do. This is where many people begin to lose it. Many people don't have that control. And the big question I like asking people is, where does your money go? It's a question that many people ask themselves. But until you sit down and begin to command where you want your money to go, begin to sit down and look at a budget and ask yourself, what are my needs? What are my wants? And part of your needs, very important priorities, is the item you're calling savings. Now, savings has been relegated by many people. It has been pushed to the end of the story. Many people want to spend and save what will remain. They only realize later that money refuses to remain to be saved. If you choose to save, you save before you spend. You don't spend before you save. So you have to live with a budget and be clear within your budget. What are my necessities? What are my luxuries here? So that then you do not shortchange savings just because you are spending money as it comes. That is the only way you begin to get control over your expenditure. The biggest problem in the world of money is not making money, it's actually commanding where your money goes.
Perfect. And then we can take a question from Liz Amolo, who is asking, how do you handle a situation where someone took a bank loan for studies, lost their job 2 years ago, still trapped into debt, but can't get a job due to CRB listing? How do we come out of this debt blunder?
Wow. And that is a good question. Also touches on education loan, but beyond education loan is the circumstances that this person has found themselves into. Now, you see, when you lose a job, of course, the CRB thing is almost like an automatic thing. So it happened. But I want to speak to this person and tell them not to give up and not to box themselves in the container that because I'm listed with CRB, I cannot get a job. I want to assure you that I've spoken to enough people and told them to apply for that job, and they have gotten a job despite the CRB listing. I have coached people who, as they went to the interview, I have told them to come out clean, not to be ashamed, especially if you did not refuse to pay. After you have performed at the interview, explain clearly that I used to have this debt, I used to pay. Circumstances changed, I lost my job, and that's why the debt went back. Every sober HR who is interested in your talent will not dismiss you because of a simple CRB report. This is my encouragement to this person, because I have worked with enough people and they have actually gotten jobs, because initially they thought because of their CRB story, they should stop applying for jobs. Keep applying for a job, keep thinking income, because anyway, you can only manage money that you have. So until you have money, you cannot manage anything. So do not give up. Don't fold your arms and say, because of CRB. Remember that debt needs money to be paid. So we have to make this money. So if you are looking at employment, don't box yourself in that box that says, if you are listed with CRB, you can't get a job. I speak to you tonight. You can get a job, because I've seen people get a job by just being true to themselves. You simply demonstrate to a HR person that this is the talent that the organization is missing. Once you do that bit, the other one you can explain. The only promise you need to make is that once I get this job, I begin to institute repayments afresh. So do not give up.
Okay, I think we can take 2 more questions because we have about 1 minute to go. The first one is, how do you deal with debt addiction? Because I'm seeing Cosma saying, thank you, Roy, I'm now going for my 12th loan.
Yes.
And I remember we have a lot of people who are loan addicts. How do we address this thing, this monster of addiction? Yeah.
Wow. Debt addiction is a big conversation, but let me just say, debt addiction is simply where we are using debt as a crutch. We're holding on to debt. Every time we have a need, we're rushing into debt, and different things contribute to it. So we have to understand what causes the addiction to debt. Sometimes it could be caused by primary addictions. So we have other addictions that demand for money that we don't have, like alcoholism, like gambling, and the likes. So they push us into continuous debt. So they cause our addiction to borrowing. So we must understand what is pushing us into that addiction. Sometimes it's a mentality that I call the borrowing mentality, where you believe that it is only debt that can sort your problem. So when you get to understand what is pushing you into that particular addiction, then you can begin to address it. Now, I wish we had enough time. Let me just also say that when you begin to rely on short-term debt, you are also beginning to set yourself for addiction. Because one, short-term debt is small amounts. They are not enough to do anything. That means even if you had a good project, you can only borrow 20K and the project needs 150,000. So you borrow 20K, you need to borrow from a different place. You're scattering things and they're coming at different rates. And before you know it, they catch up with you. You've not executed the thing you wanted fully, and now you owe so many other people. So you have to keep borrowing to firefight. So you must know what brought you into the trouble before you begin to know then how do you begin to address it. If it's a primary addiction, deal with that primary addiction first. The rest of everything falls into place. If it is because of your, let me call it ignorance in terms of how to match your needs with the right kind of debt, then you need to familiarize with yourselves with how debt works so that you can learn to match. But there are people just borrowing debt for the sake of borrowing. I need money, so any debt will do. And I've met people who are constructing a house. It is very far away from getting complete, and they're going for a salary advance to buy a bag of cement to add into the construction, and the house is very far away from completion. I do not have enough time to elaborate how that is dangerous, but that mismatch is also a big thing that can set you for trouble. So maybe one day we will also get a chance to talk about this addiction so that I can get to share a lot of things that we can do to prevent and to also cure for those that are already addicted.
Perfect. I think that is a topic that will come very, very soon. And thank you very much, Coach Roy, for your insight. I think this has been very interesting. And we really hope that we can have you another time. We shall definitely take this discussion further. Thank you very much, Coach, and we shall share your presentation and your contacts and everything. And the link will be up on YouTube in case you need something or you joined us quite late. We thank you, Zalego Academy, our IT partners. Thank you, NG Support Services, our communications and brand management partner. Do not forget to tune in to Pearl Radio 96.9 FM in Nairobi again. Pearl Radio 96.9 FM in Nairobi. Thank you very much, our audience, for tuning in tonight. It's always a pleasure having you. My name is Grace Nzula from Atara Solutions, and I have been your host. Please like our Facebook page, Atara Solutions. Follow us on Instagram at Atara Solutions. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, Atara Solutions. See you next week at the same time, same place as we look at personal branding for success. From all of us, it's good night and thank you, thank you, thank you. See you again, and we shall share the answers to your questions as we send out the presentation. And we apologize for taking too much time. Thank you very much.